All right. We are back after a lunch break. My name is Felicia Orth, the hearing officer appointed to conduct the public hearing in WQCC 23-84. It's a hearing in front of the Water Quality Control Commission. Today at 1, we set aside to accept public comment. I'll be inviting the folks who signed up through Pam Jones, who are both on the platform and in the room. After this public comment session, there will be 4 more opportunities this week to offer public comment. That's 9 a.m. and 1 p.m., both tomorrow and Friday. Just a few guidelines. I will ask you to swear or affirm that you will tell the truth. I will ask you to spell your name on the transcript, and I will have to keep time with a stopwatch. We have so much public comment, we have to limit the comments to 3 minutes apiece. If you have more than that to say, I strongly recommend that you submit a comment in writing. Again, that would go to Pam Jones, can be of any length, and is given the same weight. So we're going to start with lady in the room, Giselle Pyburn. Ms. Pyburn, Ms. Fox, would you please provide a seat for Ms. Pyburn? Please come here. You do need to have the microphone reasonably close, but not too close. Is the button pushed?
No, how's that?
That's perfect. Thank you. I know you have already provided the spelling of your name to Teresa. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do swear to tell the
Thank
truth.
you. I'll start your time.
Thank you. My name is Giselle Pyburn. I am a teacher here in town and have lived here for over 30 years. And I want to voice my opinion and also bring forth other teachers and other peers who are unable to come to a forum like this during work hours. But many of us feel like Santa Fe should not be the guinea pig for a process that's not tried and true and without strong and adequate scientific backing. And this is where I have raised my children, and as I said, 30 years, and I hope that they continue to live here and want to reside here into their futures. In addition, my students are also, they live here and they will probably remain. They tend to be a lower socioeconomic status, and so they can't leave this area. And we want to really protect Santa Fe, New Mexico from produced water status that's not, like I said, tried and true. I read an article from a Los Alamos Prashant Shireen, I think, and they made this sound like it was just the best thing since sliced bread. And I again want to push back and say we're not here to solve the problems of waste by becoming consumers of unsafe water, whether it's through the farms or other use of that water. And I thank you for listening to my comments.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pyburn. Kenneth Brennan. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. And if you would spell both of your names for the transcript.
Kennethbrennan.
Thank you. I'll start your time.
All right. My name is Ken Brennan, and my family moved to New Mexico in 1975 from Massachusetts. I'm a graduate of Cibola High School, class of 79. After high school, I joined the Navy in 1980 and retired.
Mr. Brennan, I'm sorry, you have to slow down a little so we can catch it.
Oh, okay. That's the Bostonian in me. So I joined the Navy in 1980 and I retired in 2000. After the Navy, I worked for a GE company. Who's this? Okay. So I worked for a GE company and working in the gas turbine as a field engineer, and I also worked on wind turbine commissioning and maintenances. At the past 17 years, I've been a manager managing the crews working that did the maintenance and work on those turbines. Currently, I live in Edgewood, where I'm the commissioner for District 1. I am also the mayor. In the Navy, water is a critical resource. We process seawater to make it fresh for drinking and equipment. Contaminated water from equipment and bilge is processed to remove oil and other contaminants before returning it to the sea. Water is a precious resource for everybody. In municipalities like Edgewood, wastewater from the sewer system is cleaned, processed for use and for watering, landscapes, road dust control, and other non-potable uses, providing it meets EPA standards. The use of good drinking water should be avoided at all costs for anything other than agricultural and residential needs. We're basically looking at the same thing here. Take water used in the oil and gas production and clean it to a standard so it can be reused in the oil and gas processes or used in other non-potable needs. By continuing to reuse this water, less fresh water is needed, thus preserving the precious water for agricultural and residential needs. If the Navy can take seawater from the bay in Hong Kong and turn it into drinkable water, then we can take processed water from the oil and gas process and make it used for non-potable use. For that, I strongly support this measure. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Freddie Lopez. Mr. Lopez? I'm sorry? Freddie? I'll take the marbles out of my mouth. All right. If Mr. Lopez rejoins us, I'm happy to accept his comment. Bob Moore. Bob Moore. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I
Thank
do.
you. And if you would spell your name for the record,
Bob, B-O-B, Moore, M-O-O-R-E.
I'll start your time.
I am Bob Moore. I'm a native New Mexican, born and raised in Carlsbad, New Mexico, and moved to Albuquerque to go to school at UNM in 1967. My family was originally in the farming and ranching business in Dexter, Hagerman, Carlsbad, and Jowl since the early 1900s. At the ranch, we attempted to produce oil and gas without success, but had several producing water wells. At the farms, we were originally served by artesian flowing water wells, which had to be replaced by mechanical pumps. Water has been very important throughout my life and the life of everyone in New Mexico. For recreation, we enjoyed using the Pecos River and didn't damage that water much, other than just water skiing. My dad was very active in the Carlsbad Irrigation District and in the development of the Brantley Dam and the adjacent lake for irrigation purposes. Our family has always appreciated the conservation and careful use of the water resources in New Mexico. With water being precious and limited, being able to capture it, clean it, reuse it, and perhaps recapture it again is a very prudent and wise thing to do. An alternative use of water at one time, many years ago in New Mexico, was the Project Plowshare, which was in conjunction with the Atomic Energy Commission, where we injected water into a stored heat source and produced electricity from the steam generated. New Mexico has been gifted with the Permian Basin, vast deposits of oil and gas, and have produced a great amount of cash for the operation of the state of New Mexico, particularly in the Department of Education and the school system. It is most important to encourage the production of oil and gas and its reserves to produce this income, and also protect the water that we have that is so very precious. Reusing the water multiple times makes it even more valuable to us and usable in the oil and gas industry. And keeping the fresh water available for agriculture and residential use is also important. I wholeheartedly support the proposed legislation to promote recycling of the water for reuse multiple times. And I think this is very prudent and the best practices. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Joel Robin. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
If you'd spell your names for the transcript.
Joel, Joel. Last name Robin, Robin.
Thank you. I'll start your time.
So my name is Joel Robin. I'm a resident of New Mexico. I moved here 4 years ago and decided that when I'm able to afford it, I want to make this my home to retire. As I can tell from all your accent, this is not where I'm from. I immigrated to America in 1988 from France. I raised a family of 4 children, one of whom, I'm glad to say, is alumni from UNM. And I own a small business that I still have been running for 40 years and continue to do so. Prior to here, I live in Vermont for most of my time here in America. A state I enjoy immensely because of nature. One thing I do realize, though, is that Vermont does not face the same challenge that New Mexico does with drought and water being a limited and continually depleting resource. Here in New Mexico, I could tell that it has given me so much in a short time of me being here. One thing that helped me make up my mind when I decided to move here is the true beauty of nature. It was non-negotiable after living in Vermont. So we can help future generation and ensure that there will be plenty of groundwater that goes untouched and is available to them if we're able to pass this rule. If we can reuse water that has been involved in production and are able to find ways to innovatively treat and filter this water, we'll be able to create more jobs. I strongly urge you to pass this rule for the future generation of New Mexican and lead the way in our nation, helping other states come to the same solution. The conservation of water is of vital importance. Be like water. Bruce Lee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Irving. Would you be willing to share your written statement with the court reporter in case she missed a word?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Crystal Curley, just the paper.
The paper.
Crystal Curley. If Miss Curley rejoins us, I'm happy to take her comment. Ian Schultz. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
Yes.
Would you spell your name for the transcript, please?
Ian, spelled I-A-N. Schultz, spelled S-C-H-U-L-T-Z.
Thank you. I'll start your time.
I live in Albuquerque. I have resided in New Mexico since 1965. I'm a senior architect with Rock Gap Engineering. I have over 40 years of experience in the design and construction of complex facilities for government agencies and private industrial units. The growth of New Mexico's economy and the construction environment are highly dependent on the availability of water for domestic and industrial use. Every significant industry requires some measure of water for their operations. Without an adequate supply of usable water, new companies will not establish operations in New Mexico. Existing New Mexico industries, like oil and gas, will struggle to produce the energy and products needed for a strong economy. Population growth of current New Mexicans is pressing our currently available water resources. Further, Texas continues to file lawsuits to acquire more of New Mexico's limited supply of water. Drought conditions in the Colorado River Basin and the Colorado River complex may threaten New Mexico's San Juan diversion water. New technologies will be needed to produce fresh, usable water from existing deposits of brackish water and the recovery of production waters. The reuse of treated production water in the oil and gas fields would be a significant contribution to New Mexico's economy. I fervently urge the committee to fully support the Water Action Plan in developing rules and regulations that support development and reuse of produced waters. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. Erlene Grossclose. Alrighty. Again, we have 4 more opportunities this week. Jay Grossclose. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. And if you would spell your name for the transcript.
My name is J.C. Grossclose.
Spell your name for the
Oh,
transcript.
okay. First name is J.A.Y. Last name Grosseclose.
I'll start your time now.
My name is Jay Grossclose. I'm a native New Mexican, born and raised in Roswell, educated at New Mexico State University for my career in water resources engineering. And I've been living in Santa Fe since 1980. Some years ago, I prepared water quality standards for this body for the Colorado River salinity area of the state. In fact, that's my glasses. In fact, I had also blocked at one point on an interstate body an attempt by Colorado to directly discharge produced water into dry arroyos because it was an unfair economic advantage over New Mexico that required that produced water be injected or evaporated in order to prevent discharge of salt into the Colorado River, which we are paying millions and millions of dollars to remove. So I am a strong supporter of preventing brackish water from being released into freshwater supplies. I want to thank you, commissioners, for your service in the protection of New Mexico's limited water supplies. And I appreciate what you've done through the years to continue that fine tradition. One thing I observed and concluded during my career is that New Mexico would require water reuse where water rights of other users would not be impaired by reuse projects. In other words, you couldn't take water that was actually discharged from the Santa Fe treatment plant that actually had a right to the Middle Rio Grande. So that was one of the issues. You couldn't impair a right of a downstream user. So saying that, imported water was different, and brackish water in New Mexico was different because it was considered a new supply. This practice of water reuse, I think, is essential to conserve our water quality and quantity available for human consumption. As a professional engineer, I disagree strongly with some of the comments that produced water cannot be adequately treated to drinking water standards. I've seen it done too many times. In fact, for at least 50 years that I know of, New Mexico's brackish water has been an essential component of the future water supplies of New Mexico. Outside my professional experience, I'm an outdoorsman who enjoys being in our forests and state lands for hunting, fishing, and other recreational uses.
Would you wrap up, please?
What's that?
Would you wrap up, please?
Okay. Allowing produced water to be reused in industrial and commercial applications will help new services and will conserve and extend fresh water supplies. One of the components of reuse of water is that it concentrates the pollutants. That's an essential first step to treatment. When you use it for cooling or industrial purposes, a first step is always to concentrate the waste. So it's an essential step that would be aided without additional applications of energy and could aid in control of the pollutants involved. I endorse the effort to reuse produced water for industrial and commercial purposes and disposal by safe practices of those concentrated wastes. I think it's essential to the growth and the future of our state.
Thank you, Mr. Grossman. Carl Gonzalez. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. If you would spell your names for the transcript.
Carl. Gonzalez is Gonzales.
Thank you. I'll start your time.
Thank you. My name is Carl Gonzalez. I'm a 10th generation New Mexican here in northern New Mexico. Both my mom and dad's side of the family have been here since the early 1600s. And one of my grandfathers was the first mayor of Albuquerque and helped build the church there on Alameda and 4th Street. And I've lived in Southwest Albuquerque all my life. I currently work for Creek Carriers, a trucking company that has over 5,000 trucks on the road, and very aware of the need of the oil and gas industry for the continuation of moving products to all Americans across this country, and currently working with Costco, moving freight from Aurora, Colorado to Albuquerque, the 3 Costcos in Albuquerque. And I'm in favor of repurposing water for the oil and gas industry, and I hope that the continuation of this industry will be able to do that and continue to do that. And I'm very thankful for you to be here and listen to the people who have interest in this. And thank you for your consideration, and may God bless the great state of New Mexico. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. Joyce Caton. Maybe mispronouncing names here. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth? Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
Yes.
Thank you. And if you would state and spell your name for the court reporter.
First name is Doyle, Doyle. Last name, Caton, Caton.
Thank you. I will start your time now.
Okay, I'm an old guy, but I've experienced a little bit. My whole life has been spent gathering, analyzing, and moving information, so I'm not an expert in anything. There was a time I knew who they were. My first experience with these issues was as a child when I grew up in the oil patches in Oklahoma, near Ada, Oklahoma. And later in the 60s, we lost 3 wells, water wells, due to water flooding, secondary recovery. And that was not because of the technology, it was because people broke the laws. There was a law in the books in Oklahoma in 1919 that if you abandoned a well or the casing, you plugged it below the sweetwater veins. That was ignored a lot. At that time, I was developing a program. I've done quite a bit of project and program development. And since that's the home of the Robert S. Kerr Water Laboratory, and that we had an environmental science program at the college, I developed the first state level environmental information center, not because of our talent probably, but because we had a lot of water lab activity. And Carl Albert, Speaker of the House, was our congressman. Everybody wanted to please us, but it turned out to be a pretty good project. I was brought a few years later to the University of New Mexico and repeated the same thing in energy information. with an organization called NECA, National Energy Information Center Affiliate. NECA, National Energy Information Center Affiliate. That was one of the early DOE contracts when DOE was created. And it was actually the National Energy Information Center was in Washington. We had about 10 people on staff there. A lot of the information systems for the DOE offices and so forth. So I've been exposed to a lot of that stuff all my life, both energy and environment. And to me, I look at my early experience of the problems we had in Oklahoma and with other things. All we need is enforcement of some of the legislation that's on the books and good legislation. And I've worked with the legislature up here on an awful lot from the University of New Mexico some years ago. But if it's if
I don't have my volume up. I forgot I turned it off. How goes it?
No, that's okay. I just was about to wrap up. Point is, I do have a book that I can let anybody look at. I'd like to keep it. I was on a planning program for this, and it was covered by people like Jed Huntley and Jules Bergman and others back. It was in Tulsa, 1973, Growth with Environmental Quality. And we had the Sierra Club, other people at that level with the oil companies, Joe Williams companies, the Phillips people, all of those. I'd be happy to put people in touch with any of my old network that's still living. I turned 90 just a few weeks ago, so I've lost most of them. But thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Caton. Kathy Day. Kathy Day.
Hello,
Oh, are you on the platform?
I am, yes.
Okay, we're going to need you to speak a lot louder.
Okay, I can do that.
All right, that's better. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
All right, and if you would spell your name for the court reporter.
Cathy and then Day.
All right, I'll start your 3 minutes now.
Thank you. So thank you to the members of the Water Quality Control Commission and the New Mexico Environment Department for setting aside this time to hear from members of the public about the proposed rule to outline limitations to the use of produced water. I am an agricultural and environmental scientist with a PhD in geography from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where I studied the effects of and response to climate change in New Mexico farming. I'm here representing the interests of the Agricultura Cooperative Network that works in the South Valley of Albuquerque with more than 70 farmers from around the state. As an expert in the effects of climate change on agriculture, I'm deeply aware of New Mexico's current and expected future water situation, with annual precipitation expected to decline by at least 10% in New Mexico by the end of the century under current high emission scenarios, and snow water equivalent expected to decline by more than 40%. Overall water availability is expected to decline across the state. The declines will be exacerbated by decreasing soil moisture because of rising temperatures and by population growth demanding ever higher proportions of available water. Agriculture and residential needs will continue even as water availability declines. With such declines in water availability in mind, it may seem advantageous to recycle water used whenever possible. However, the water used for agriculture and residential uses must be free of highly concerning contaminants. Produced water has a long list of contaminants, including some of well-known concern like per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, carcinogens like benzene and toluene, and a variety of radioactive compounds like uranium and plutonium. Most concerning, however, is that according to a 2020 analysis, only 24% of 1,198 chemicals identified in produced water can be detected through standard analytical methods. In addition, trade secrets limit our understanding of potential additional substances of concern. As a consequence, there are not methods currently in place to fully assess the potential impact of produced water in any settings where such water is used. With toxic spills common in the oil and gas industry, including an average of 4 toxic spills per day in New Mexico, Moving produced water away from its point of origin creates too many risks of contaminating water used for drinking and irrigation. In the short term, New Mexico must ensure that produced water is carefully isolated from all sources of water used for human consumptive purposes like drinking and irrigation. In the long term, New Mexico needs to move rapidly away from fossil fuels extraction because of their adverse impacts on the climate, the water, and human health. Thank you.
Thank you. The screen name indicates Ms. Helga Garza may be with you. She's another commenter.
That's correct.
All right. Ms. Garza, do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
All right. Would you spell your name for the transcripts?
Helga, Helga, Garza, Garza.
I'll start your time now.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Helga Garza. I'm the Executive Director of Agricultura Cooperative Network. We are a small-scale farming collective. Have done a lot of work in procurement practice, in procurement policy change in order for institutional investments. We are changing a food system throughout New Mexico for a healthier, more productive food system that we will not rely on the global food market. That's the long-term goal. Our collective of farmers and ranchers over the past 15 years have been doing a lot of work in order to keep our production as healthy as possible. Everyone using organic methods, being good stewards to the land, also scaling our production regarding our limited water resources. Available land is very hard to obtain here, so we're trying to keep the generational wealth land of our cooperative in healthy hands. Food production, even within our ranchers that have to take their cattle to USDA certified processors. So everybody's making an effort in order to produce the highest quality, the healthiest quality, working with our limited resources in order to produce a healthy food system for the state of New Mexico, feeding schools throughout the state, early childhood centers throughout the state, senior centers throughout the state, hospitals, working with the local food banks, working with RX programs as food is medicine with various clinics, and also providing our own community-supported agricultural program that feeds populations that are disabled or would not have the opportunity to put fresh, local, organic produce at their table. So this is very concerning to us, this rule of produced water. We have many of our farms, especially our urban farms, are within brownfield sites, already fighting contamination within land. Many of the farms too are in Superfund sites. So we've been doing everything to mitigate that, to keep our soils healthy, to keep our water resource healthy. So this for us is very concerning, given the fact that we are feeding our communities throughout New Mexico. We are developing an economic wealth of health, wealth, and well-being. And this is concerning to us regarding all of the health risks, all of the environmental risks that this ruling brings. So on behalf of our 75 farmers, ranchers that are working hard to keep being good stewards to the land and being good stewards to our limited resource, we are even collecting our precious generational seeds. So,
Ms. Garza, would you wrap up, please?
yes. Okay. So on behalf of all of our farmers, we are against this produced water rule. Thank you.
Thank you. Emily Tucker. Emily Tucker. Right, if Ms. Tucker rejoins us, I'm happy to take her comment. Nicole Olanovich.
Hello.
Hello, I can hear you. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
Yes,
And if you would spell your name for the transcript, please.
it's Nicole, Nicole, last name Maestas Olanovich, Maestas-Olonovich.
Thank you. I'll start your 3 minutes now.
Thank you. Chair and members of the commission, my name's Nicole Maestas Olanovich. I'm a 6th generation New Mexican, disabled combat veteran, a mother, a homeowner, a lifelong resident of the South Valley, and here on behalf of the Adelante Progressive Caucus and myself. New Mexico seems to be viewed as a safe haven for dumping toxic waste, extraction of hazardous waste, and now some folks in our government want to depend on water for survival. We have fought back against the misuse of our lands and water in the legislature. This year, one of those bills we stood up against was called the Strategic Water Supply. Our people spoke out loud and clear that we are against both the funding of oil and gas's water waste and the housing of that waste in our backyard. Now I'm asking you, the Water Quality Control Commission, to oppose these rule changes. Quite frankly, the rule changes around water that are being suggested make me fear for myself as somebody who's disabled due to environmental toxin exposure. And moreover, this makes me absolutely terrified for my 1-year-old daughter's future in the land of our ancestors. I feel like we must take every action necessary to protect our environment, and this is going in the exact opposite direction. It's a shame that when our legislature sets a standard, some in power feel like they can just change the rules to go around the wishes of the people in New Mexico and the standards set in the roundhouse. Almost like some folks don't want to hear the voices of New Mexicans, but rather superimpose political ambitions, money, and power on the literal backs of our population. This behavior is not unnoticed. The youth are watching. These rule changes are forward-facing, and we are asking you to oppose this slide of hand. Together, we need to continue to protect our acequias, our watersheds, our people from the hazardous, unstudied, and destructive rule changes that put our clean water at risk because we know water is life. Please heed our wishes and oppose these rule changes. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Lanovich. Paula Garcia. Paula Garcia?
Good afternoon.
Oh, hello, I can hear you. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
If you would spell your name for the transcript.
Paula Garcia.
Thank you. I'll start your 3 minutes now.
Good afternoon, members of the Water Quality Control Commission. Thank you for this opportunity to present to you today. The New Mexico Acequia Association is a statewide organization of acequias and community ditches throughout New Mexico, and I am here to voice the concerns of acequia communities and traditional New Mexico communities. Our mission is to protect water, to grow healthy food for our families and communities, and to honor our cultural heritage. Protecting clean water for our communities is our utmost concern as caretakers of our rivers and acequias. We urge the Water Quality Control Commission to ensure that New Mexico is governed by rigorous water quality regulations, including stronger language in the proposed regulations for the reuse of wastewater from oil and gas, referred to as produced water. We have 3 primary points that we would like to share with you today. First, I would like to recognize the language that's in the rule that would prohibit the discharge of reused produced water to surface or groundwater resources. This would include uses, but not limited to several that are mentioned in the rule. But the current proposed rule contains this prohibition, and also states that any federal permit that allows discharge of produced water to surface or groundwater will be denied by the state. This language should be retained in the rule. The second point we have is concern about the listing of some definitions in the rule that we think are not necessary. This would be removal of definitions for agriculture that are not consistent with the prohibition on discharge. Any of this language, which appears to be limited to the definitions for reused water, for agriculture, environmental buffers, food crop applications, should be removed from the rule to be absolutely clear that there would be no discharges for uses on land, river, and acequias. Our third point is that we urge the commission to remove language for the use of reused produced water for industrial projects, or to limit the use only to projects in the oil field. This rule, as written, would authorize the use of reused produced water outside the oil field for industrial projects. It's our concern that there is not adequate scientific data to show that this is a safe use of water, and that there is not adequate technology that can reduce the toxic chemicals in produced water to safe levels, especially considering that not all the chemicals in oil and gas wastewater are disclosed or even known or can be detected. Even trace amounts of toxins can pose health risks to our communities. And we're especially concerned about this because of our use of the use of agriculture in the field. In summary, we strongly urge the prohibition on discharging produced water to surface water and groundwater. And we will be submitting written comments with exhibits in addition to these verbal comments. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Garcia. Vidal Gonzalez? Vidal Gonzalez?
Hello, yes. Are you able to hear me?
Oh, yes, quite clearly. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
Yes.
Would you spell your name for the transcript?
Vidal, Vidal, Gonzalez, Gonzales.
Thank you. I'll start your 3 minutes now.
Singing to Edie, everybody. My name is Vidal Gonzalez. I'm a tribal member of Santa Clara Pueblo. New Mexico is home to land-based communities, land grants, acequias, and tribal nations where intergenerational families continue to be stewards of the water and land. Protecting clean water for New Mexican communities is of utmost concern as caretakers of our waters and land. To tribal nations of the state, the waters of New Mexico have always been sacred sites themselves, and the water has always been used in cultural rites and practices. I urge the Water Quality Control Commission to ensure that New Mexico is governed by rigorous water quality protections, including stronger language in the proposed regulation for reuse of wastewater from oil and gas referred to as produced water. I recommend that the Commission continues to prohibit the discharge of reused produced water to surface water and groundwater. The current proposed rule contains this prohibition and also states that any federal permit that allows discharge of produced water to surface water or groundwater will be denied by the state. This language in the rule must be retained. This is specifically to uphold the indigenous practices and rights of the state. Number two, removal of definitions for uses such as agriculture, environmental buffers, food crop applications, and other similar language should be removed from the rule so that there is no further confusion. Third, remove language for use of reused produced water for industrial projects or limit the use only to projects in the oil fields. The proposed rule would allow using reused produced water for industrial projects all over the state. There's no credible scientific data showing that current technology can reduce the toxic chemicals in produced water to safe levels. Even trace amounts of these toxins can pose significant health risks. In summary, I strongly urge that the prohibition on discharging produced water to surface water or groundwater will be retained, and that other problematic and overtly broad language on use for agriculture and industrial projects will be removed. I have also submitted written comments that should be referenced as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. Is there anyone else in the room who has not yet offered comment, who would like to offer comment? Ms. Fox? We still have people coming to the table. Hello, do you
Hi there.
swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
And if you would state and spell your name for the transcript.
Yes, ma'am. It's Freddie, Freddie, Lopez, Lopez.
Thank you. I'll start your time now.
Thank you. My name is Freddie Lopez, and I reside right here in the oldest capital of the country. I've lived here all my life. I'm a born and raised New Mexican. I graduated from the Santa Fe Community College with a degree in business administration. The reason why I'm speaking today is because I truly believe in our oil and gas industry. It is the foundation of New Mexico's economy. At the same time, I also believe in our environment. We have a saying here in New Mexico, El agua es vida. Water is life. In New Mexico, water is one of our most precious resources. It is what we need to live by. You can't go more than 2 days without water. And I have to give so much credit to our pueblos and our reservations because they are the backstop to making sure that our environment and our beautiful landscapes in New Mexico are preserved. And at the same time, I truly believe in our oil and gas industry because it is just the backbone of our economy. It provides jobs. It is a reason why we have a budget surplus. It's a reason why our schools are funded. And at the same time, we have to preserve our environment. I believe this rule is going to be tremendous, not only for the oil and gas industry, but as well as our environment. Because as we said here in New Mexico, el agua es vida, water is life. And if we are not finding that perfect balance, how can we move forward, especially as a state? And with our water, why not use reusable water? We have the technologies to do so. And having the oil and gas industry be involved in making sure that our environment is protected and our water is kept pure and safe, because we all want clean, fresh air and water for our kids. But we shouldn't do it at the cost of our economy. We shouldn't do it at the cost of our industry. So I have proposed, and I really am asking all of you to please vote in favor of this rule. If you truly believe, not just in our oil and gas industry, but if you truly believe in our environment and our children's future and our water, I please urge you to vote in favor of this bill because it is what is needed here in New Mexico. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lopez. Anyone else in the room who has not yet offered public comment? I have one more name, I believe on the platform, Reverend Ryan Tate. Reverend Tate? Oh, all right. Thank you. This then brings us to the end of the public comment session today. We will return to the technical case. When we broke into the technical case, we were still still posing questions to Dr. Lewis, who's a witness for Amigos Bravos and the Sierra Club. Ms. Taylor had completed her questions, so then we moved to Center for Biological Diversity. Were there questions?
Madam Hearing Officer, this is Colin with the Center for Biological Diversity. We have no questions for this
Wait,
witness.
the court reporter didn't hear you?
Oh, I apologize. This is Colin Cox with the Center for Biological Diversity, and I have no questions for this witness.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And now, Mr. Hightower, do you have questions of Dr. Lewis? No? Let's see, Ms. Nanasi. Okay, terrific. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Dr. Lewis, I only have a handful of questions for you, okay? Could you please explain for us the concept of the dose makes the poison?
Sure, yeah, that's a very common phrase used in public health and epidemiology. It essentially means that pretty much any substance, if one is exposed to high enough concentrations, is capable of causing toxicity.
So any substance can be dangerous to health, welfare, and the environment if it exceeds a certain level.
For the most part, yes.
And so what ultimately matters is the quantity that you have present, correct?
The quantity and also the type of exposure, the route of exposure also can play a role. So by way of an example, water in fact can be toxic if you drink too much water without electrolytes, but you can't bathe too much. So if you're getting exposed to water via your skin, it might not be toxic, but via an oral route of exposure, it might be toxic.
Okay. And I think you mentioned earlier that there's a threshold at which a substance can become toxic. Is that right?
Some types of constituents, when one is exposed, have what are called threshold effects. And then there are other constituents, or hazards really is the right term, that are believed to not have threshold effects. And in particular, for example, carcinogenic compounds are typically believed not to have a threshold effect.
Meaning that any exposure to such substances is harmful to some degree. Is that what that means?
Correct. In the case of carcinogens, it increases the probability of cancer.
Okay. Similar to like radiation.
Correct.
Okay. So setting those substances aside and looking at substances that have thresholds, the degree of risk that a particular substance poses is dependent upon whether this threshold of toxicity is met or exceeded, correct?
That's the model, yes.
And so to evaluate whether a particular substance poses a risk to health, welfare, or the environment, we need to know what this toxicity threshold is for each particular substance.
That's correct.
If we don't know this toxicity threshold for a substance, we can't determine what levels of the substance would be harmful.
That's correct.
So with this idea in mind, I want to talk about the contaminants and constituents in produced water, okay? The Danforth study or review paper found that approximately 1,200 different chemicals and constituents have been identified in produced water. Correct?
Correct.
And there was another study I think you referenced that showed that there were up to 2,800 different chemicals and constituents in produced water.
Correct.
Now I want to talk just about the Danforth study because it's the one that I happen to be more familiar with, okay? Looking at the 1,200 chemicals identified in the Danforth study, 167 of them have been sufficiently studied by the scientific community to determine their toxicity to a degree that can be used to evaluate risk, correct?
I believe that's the correct number, yes.
And so what that means is that we only have sufficient toxicological data on about 14% of the chemicals and constituents in produced water that'll allow us to evaluate the risk of those substances.
And I would amend that to say of the known constituents in produced water, yes.
And so of the substances that we know are in produced water, there are over 1,000 chemicals present that have not been sufficiently studied to know how much risk they pose to health, welfare, and the environment.
That's correct.
We don't know the dose at which each of these over 1,000 chemicals would pose undue risk of harm to health, welfare, and the environment. And so until we know how dangerous these chemicals are to plants, animals, and humans, we cannot fully evaluate the risk posed to health, welfare, and the environment by treated or untreated produced water, correct?
That's correct.
As the science stands, we do not have sufficient toxicological data as to over 1,000 chemicals that we know can be present in produced water.
Correct.
And so, because we do not have this information, because the science doesn't exist yet, your opinion is that both treated and untreated produced water are dangerous to plant, animal, and human health and safety.
They pose a risk to plant, human health.
And you say that they pose a risk because we don't have the data.
Sorry, let me amend that. They may pose a risk. I'm going to amend that and say that they may pose a risk.
Because we don't have data.
Because we don't have data.
In order to determine what risk is, we have to base it on existing data, correct?
Existing studies on those contaminants are hazardous or not, yes.
Based on your review of the literature and all of the testimony in this case, you are unaware of any existing scientific methods and processes that would make produced water safe for reuse, correct?
That's true. Yeah.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dodd. Mr. Davis? Thank you very much. Mr. Knight? Terrific. I know that Commissioner Brankard, I didn't mean it that way. Commissioner Brankard, I know that you joined us after I had called on all the other commissioners to see if they had questions of Dr. Lewis. Do you have any questions of Dr. Lewis at this time? May have stepped away. All right. Let's see.
I have no questions.
Oh, thank you, Commissioner Brankard. Anything else from any commissioner before I ask Ms. Fox? She has redirect. Oh, all right.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer, Commissioners. I just have a couple of very short questions for redirect, and that is this. Dr. Lewis, we've heard comparisons between municipal wastewater streams and produced wastewater streams, and that both have known and unknown constituents, correct?
Yes. Yes.
And the implication of that comparison is that the two waste streams are the same or similar, and that there's no good scientific reason to distinguish the two. What is your response to this comparison?
So I think that there is valid scientific basis to distinguish the two. The waste streams are not the same. As I've discussed, produced water has much more variability in the numbers and concentrations of potential contaminants than municipal wastewater. And produced water has a wide variety of known hazards, many of which do not have standards or standard analytical methods for detection. Just because there may be unknown constituents in low concentrations in municipal water does not mean we should ignore the known constituents in high concentrations in produced water. Two wrongs don't make a right, to put it simply. The fact that despite treatment, contaminants may nonetheless pass through municipal treatment plants and make it into drinking water systems does not justify knowingly allowing additional contamination from produced water that would likely harm human health and the environment. And as I alluded to in my cross-examination, there has been greater recognition in the last couple of decades of the potential for contaminants of emerging concern to be in our drinking water and work to address those risks. And again, I already discussed PFAS contaminants, and as the commissioners may know, we are at a point where as a society, we're prepared to spend huge amounts of money to address PFAS because they pose a real concern, particularly to drinking water systems. And that is a good analogy, in my opinion, to the situation with produced water.
That's all we have, Madam Hearing Officer.
Ms. Fox, is there any reason not to excuse Dr. Lewis? Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Lewis.
Thank you very much to the commission. I appreciate it.
Been going just an hour. I'd like to go a little more. Our next witness that we are taking before we move back to the department's cross-examination is Mr. Hightower. That's all right. Yes, it is your turn for a presentation. So first, I'm sorry, what? Oh, Pam, can you get the slideshow up? Okay. All right. While she's doing that, do you swear or affirm to tell the truth? And if you would spell your name for the transcript. The
It's not,
excuse me.
sorry, it's based upon the Wednesday meeting.
Right. It's the slideshow that was uploaded to the Dropbox. All right. That'll take her just a moment. I'm sorry. We need you in front of a microphone.
Marilyn Massey, New Energy Economy. I was just asking if Mr. Hightower could speak closer to the mic because I couldn't hear him. I'll make this mic.
Thank you for that. It's definitely a process. Too close, but not too close. All right, they're working on your slideshow. Is it, remember you have 30 minutes?
So I put together my testimony and my rebuttal together.
Yeah.
So I understood it'd be an hour.
Okay.
Hopefully I won't take that.
All right. Again, so long as it is your rebuttal. Ms. Fox? I need you in front of a microphone.
Mr. Hightower filed no rebuttal. He may serve rebut.
Okay, that's right. Mr. Hightower, you didn't file rebuttal testimony.
That's correct.
However, you may still rebut in the sense of you may respond to someone else's rebuttal.
Okay.
Okay. It's I know it's a term of art.
That's
with lawyers.
kind of a fine line, isn't it?
The difference is between responding to their direct NOIs and responding to their rebuttal.
Yeah, I figured that out, but I think I can make it work.
All right. Pam, are we close?
So you want me to just give technical background? I think you'd like to hear people.
You want to do that?
Sure.
Okay.
Maybe I can waste a little time while they're trying to figure that out.
All right.
So my background, sorry about that. My background is I have a master and bachelor's degrees from New Mexico State in civil and environmental engineering. I've worked in the industry for about 40 years. Most recently at Sandia National Laboratories, where I worked for 38 years. While I was at Sandia, I did a number of activities, but for 10 years, I ran environmental remediation and restoration programs for the DOE.
at sites across the U.S. Worked with the EPA, their national laboratories, and their regional offices for a lot of those testing and evaluation of new and innovative technologies for the DOE for site cleanup and waste management. And then I also worked for the Department of Energy looking at non-traditional water resources for national security. And so I did a lot of work on desalination and non-traditional water treatment reuse for both the United States and countries around the world. So that's the background that I'll generally talk about, but I'm also on the New Mexico Desal Association. Started that about 7 or 8 years ago, looking at brackish waters and saline waters in New Mexico for additional water supplies. And then currently I'm the director of the New Mexico Produced Water Research Consortium. So I'll give information, personal information on all that work that's been done over the last 25 or 30 years and how that applies to this legislation and potential rulemaking.
Thank you. Pam, how are we doing? All right.
I have it on my computer. I did send it in the Dropbox. They said that they had gotten it. It'd be in by Friday. That's Friday.
Let's take a 10-minute break so that folks get a break and then we don't have to break into his presentation. Okay, we are back after a short break to address a technological issue. Mr. Hightower, we now have your slideshow on the screen. If you would please proceed.
So do you want to go to presentation mode? Would that be easier for people? On the bottom right-hand corner. I was just going to talk through the slides, yeah, and I can tell you when the slide, but there is a slideshow version at the very bottom right-hand where it makes the slides bigger. Yeah.
Right?
No, there's.
Right, so we tried.
All right.
Presentation. Showed it on here, but not on the web.
Okay, that's fine.
All
We'll
right.
make it work.
Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Sorry about that. I did send it in. I was supposed to, and I got an email that it was sent in. So really, next slide is the first slide that I'd like to talk to. Okay, thank you. So the overview that I'm going to present, as I mentioned, is the last 20 years or so in my efforts working with the Department of Energy on environmental remediation, environmental restoration, innovative technology development associated with desalination, because a lot of the technologies that we need to look at for produced water are desal technologies. They would be best available technologies, if you will, both reverse osmosis and distillation. So I'll talk about the movement and efforts within the United States to get to this point in those technologies. I'm going to talk about the issues of risks associated with not addressing our water supply issues and freshwater supply concerns and challenges, and the directions of the United States and the US EPA in looking at these non-traditional waters or wastewaters to support additional water supply development. And finally, I'll talk a little bit about some of the results we have from the consortium as they pertain to issues of fit for purpose treatment and reuse, as they pertain to evaluating the constituents of concern in produced water, and the work that we've done on identifying the constituents in produced water, as well as the unknowns in produced water. And I'll talk about that and the results that we have, leading toward conclusions that I had in my paper that we can treat produced water, both out of the San Juan Basin and the Permian Basin, the levels that I think are appropriate for fit for purpose reuse, and that we have addressed all the issues that we see in those constituents in those waters, and we have addressed the unknowns associated with those. So with that, I'll just kind of head into the next slide, please. I want to talk about desalination because I think that the United States has spent about 60 years looking at these desal technologies and trying to make them cost effective. We started out in the early 1960s with President Kennedy, starting the Office of Saline Water. Saving water, it was a research activity. From that work, the development of new thermal technologies to support desalination, and the initiation of research on reverse osmosis. So those technologies have been around for 60 years, and they're now at the point where they're very mature, very cost effective. They're being used worldwide today for both saline and brackish water
No shit. It's good to be stubborn. Why do they choose stubborn as the name for this?
Very sorry. Mr. Maxwell, can you hear me?
Your Honor, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, very clearly. Thank you so much. After we finally got the PowerPoint up, the system crashed. So we're not going to share the PowerPoint at this time. We will find a way of putting it on the WQCC webpage or in a Dropbox folder that will be accessible to anyone who'd like to see it. In the meantime, in order to proceed with the testimony, Mr. Hightower is going to offer his presentation speaking from his notes. So, Mr. Hightower, I'm sorry, this is our third kind of stop and start, but I'm hoping to get through your presentation at this time.
All right, thank you very much. So I was talking about the desal program for the United States, started in 1960. I have some quotes from John F. Kennedy about how important this was for the country long term to address the water supply issues. In 1985, the Office of Saline Water was passed over to the Bureau of Reclamation. And that's important because we see regulations in federal CFR about waters west of the 98th meridian, which is the Bureau of Reclamation's purview for the United States as far as providing new water supplies and water supplies for agriculture for the Western U.S. And that's one of the reasons that we'll see some discussion about work that the Bureau of Reclamation has been doing on desalination and work that I've done in support of them to address brackish waters, saline waters west of the 98th meridian for applications to agriculture and municipal supplies. My next slide that I had was to talk about the direction in the last, from about 2000 on, in desalination research on new technologies to support brackish and saline water reuse. That was started with in 1996 with the Desal Act, the U.S. Desal Act, that was set up understanding.
Hold on one second, Ms. Nanasi.
I'd like to make an objection for the record. I understand that some leeway shall be granted, but this whole history was not part of his NOI or his testimony. So I think that while it could be interesting under certain circumstances, it's inappropriate at this point. So we would object.
All right, thank you, Ms. Nanasi. Mr. Hightower, Ms. Fox, and Ms. Nanasi, I think, share the view that what you're doing right now is objectionable because it wasn't written out in your testimony. And
Okay.
so I'll ask you to move on to what you actually filed in your.
Okay, I thought there was some discussion about who I was trying to represent, and I wanted to make sure that people understood the background of who I'm. But we can
Yeah.
skip across that.
All right,
Okay.
thank you.
Let's talk real quickly about efforts then associated with produced water treatment and reuse us from 2000 on. I think that that's important because the US EPA became involved with that and has written a number of technical documents around the use of desalination or produced water treatment. In my presentation, I give a number of examples of those EPA documents that we've used for the last 5 years in trying to direct the research associated with produced water reuse as our roles. It's important, I think, to talk about, and I mentioned it in my paper, that there are a number of states that have been utilizing desalination technologies, both for public supplies as well as the treatment of produced water. Other presenters have talked about those, but I think that one that's important to New Mexico is that in conjunction with the Bureau of Reclamation and in conjunction with the New Mexico Environment Department in 2005 through 2008 and the Department of Energy, we did do research in northwestern New Mexico in the San Juan Basin, utilizing treated produced water out of the San Juan Basin for agricultural applications. That was a 3-year study. There are a number of.
I'd object again. I object again. I'm just looking at his testimony. I don't recall it, but I'm also looking, and there's basically nothing in here before 2019. And so I don't know about all this EPA in the 2000s and whatever. That's not part of his testimony, and I would object.
Oh, sorry. Mr. Hightower, this really is, oh, you wanted to add something, Ms. Fox?
Summarize the Madam Hearing Officer, thank you. I was just going to ask you to do what I think you're about to do, and that's direct him to stick to the direct testimony that's filed.
Yes.
May I be heard on this?
Yes.
So I think.
Oh, this is Jeff Wexler.
Hello. Yeah. So I guess my first comment for the commission is, if you want to know who you can trust, look for the party that's trying to give you more information rather than less. And my comment here is, in terms of this witness's testimony, like, he's allowed to do Sir rebuttal. He's certainly allowed to give background as to this information that he gave in his written presentation. This information, in terms of the specifically what he's talking about, the San Juan, I believe shows up on page 14. I mean,
I believe I did mention that in my
maybe it's not.
presentation.
Maybe I have the wrong page, but it's in the testimony, and we all know that you're not required to sit down and read. In fact, in your pre-hearing order, you specifically said you're not allowed to read the testimony. So we're not, let's try and remember the purpose here, to provide as much information as we can to the commission.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Wexler. Mr. Hightower, I think you understand now that if you don't stick to the pre-filed testimony, we're going to just be drawing objections through the whole.
I understand. I can get rid of 4 or 5 of these BRFs.
All right. Thank you. Please go ahead.
I did mention in my testimony the fact that the U.S. EPA in 2020 stood up the Water Reuse Action Plan, a National Water Reuse Action Plan. And in that plan, the New Mexico Produced Water Research Consortium was asked to manage or help them in the assessment of produced water for reuse, for fit for purpose reuse. That action was focused on the EPA understanding that there's some 30 states in the U.S. that have produced water, and that many of those states are in areas that are in water stressed states. And therefore, in their water reuse action plan, they picked 5 major categories of water reuse. One was several were industrial reuse. One was electric power plants. One was municipal wastewater reuse. One was storm water, and one was produced water. So produced water for the US EPA is in the top 5 categories for looking at reuse of produced water or supplementing water supplies in all of the states in the US. Their concept is the fit for purpose treatment and reuse, and their indication, and it's in my paper, is around making sure that one of the tenets of this activity is that focus should be on not the wastewater, but the treated water. That the focus is on making sure that these waters are treated to a level that's safe for the public and for the environment. With that as a point of national interest by the EPA, I then talked about
I need to object. I understand that it is true that the EPA National Water Reuse Action Plan is listed in Mr. Hightower's testimony. However, all this about, I know that hearsay is allowed in the administrative hearings, but to decide without anything that what EPA's top priorities are, it's completely beyond the scope of his testimony. There is no, if he wanted to cite it, if he wanted to attach it, something, but saying what EPA wants when there's nothing in the record is beyond the scope, and I object.
All right, thank you, Ms. Anasi. Mr. Hightower, it seems as though we're not getting a reflection of what was actually submitted as any kind of narrative from you. And I'm not trying to be formalistic with you, but it is a matter of great importance.
So the question I guess I have is, if I do mention it, I can talk about it, I think. Is that not correct?
Yeah, so I see, oops, sorry. So I do see in your testimony the teaming arrangement with EPA, the RAP, and the fit for purpose treatment reuse of 5 major wastewater sources.
One of them was produced water.
Okay. All right. So please go ahead and just stick closely. Ms. Fox, are you?
Tell you what I can do. I can take what I submitted and I'll try to discuss that. Is that fair enough?
That's exactly our process.
Okay. I did read from the information we had that you didn't want me to read this, and so I was adding some more detail for the Water Quality Control Commission, but I don't have to do that. I can read from this and summarize.
Summarize from what you
Okay.
filed. That's exactly right.
All right, I'll do that. Let me just kind of start working through the pages and get this microphone out of my way, as long as I can stay in front of it. Are you happy? Is this okay? All right. Okay, I'll follow. I'll follow my presentation exactly with no additional comments. So I did mention the New Mexico Produced Water Act. So good, I can talk about that. My point about the New Mexico Produced Water Act is I think that it's very much in line with the EPA RAP program. The focus is, and I underlined it in my presentation on page 6, was the commission shall adopt quality standards for surface and groundwaters of the state based on credible scientific data and other evidence appropriate, stating that some of the opportunities for the use of produced water in New Mexico, again, in line with the EPA's Water Reuse Action Plan, suggests that you shall give weight as it deems appropriate to the facts and circumstances for the use, value and use of the water supplies, for propagation of fish and wildlife, for recreational purposes and agricultural, industrial, and other purposes. So it does suggest that the treatment and reuse of produced water for these types of applications are appropriate and should be considered as the commission deems. The point that I tried to make in my presentation was that from a perspective of trying to evaluate technologies and assessing technologies to be able to do that, we had to pick some level of treatment that we were going to be focused on. And so what we tried to do is go into the water quality criteria that exists today, and we essentially are using or looking at 20.6.4.900, the numerical standards that we see for discharge. Those aren't the only standards. There are other standards that go along with that. But as far as looking at technologies to support produced water reuse in the state of New Mexico, that was a starting point for us to look at technology providers and give them a benchmark to try to work toward. So I wanted to mention then looking at what else I can do. One of the things that we tried to do as we moved forward was to collect data on the quantity and quality of produced water in the state of New Mexico. And I have a slide in there that, Ms. Murphy talked about this yesterday or the day before. The San Juan Basin is a basin. There's also the Raton Basin, which is not a big basin. And then there's the Permian Basin. The Raton Basin has not as much excess produced water as Ms. Murphy mentioned, but it is of higher quality. And in my report, I talk about the level of produced water quality in these basins. The Raton Basin is a basin that is small, but it has some very high water quality, generally 1,000 to 2,000 parts per million TDS. But it's also in an area that has trout streams. So if you were going to treat that water and use it for reuse, it's going to have to be very high quality water. Whereas the San Juan Basin is generally the 20 to 40,000 parts per million TDS. That's easily treatable within the technologies like reverse osmosis that are currently available. And we have done experiments and testing of those types of technologies for water in that region and have been very successful in reducing the constituents and contaminants associated with that water. And then I'm going to talk about that here in a second on what those values are. In the Permian Basin, that's where most of the excess produced water is. It's also in an area of the state that's one of the driest and most in need of water resources. There, the water is closer to 100,000 parts per million TDS, 3 times salt water. And the types of technologies that are going to be required there are generally thermal technologies. But those have been investigated by the United States for the last 40 years. And we've made significant improvements in the opportunities for the use of those technologies to support treatment of these kinds of produced water. If we look at the volumes, and Ms. Murphy mentioned this yesterday, the day before, that since about 2010, as we moved away from just conventional oil and gas and moved into unconventional oil and gas, we have increased in the Permian Basin significantly the amount of produced water that's available. And based upon studies from the Water Resources Research Institute at New Mexico State and recent data from OCD, we're close to 250,000 acre feet of excess produced water in the state, in the Permian Basin. I think that what I was trying to show with this information is that the quantities of water that we see are significant relative to the potential supplies of fresh water in those regions of the state. In the San Juan Basin, we still have a lot of people that are hauling water for municipal supplies. And so in an area where we have a lot of diverse oil and gas operations and technologies that can treat that less saline produced water in those rural areas of the northwestern New Mexico, there's a huge opportunity to provide some social improvements, economic improvements for people in that region also. So just because the San Juan Basin doesn't have huge volumes of produced water that could be utilized, the fact that that's an area that needs additional water resources for a dispersed population that has significant issues with access to surface or water supplies is an opportunity also. Those are huge opportunities that reduce the risk of running out of water in southeastern New Mexico and reduce the risk for populations, health risk of populations at risk in the Northwest. The next part of my presentation that I presented was the fact that there is some discrepancy between what we find in our analysis and testing of produced water and what has been stated in the literature. The Danforth study has been mentioned many, many times by others. I mentioned it in our work that we've done in looking at the comparison between municipal wastewater, Pecos River water, and produced water, what we find is that all three of those wastewaters have very similar numbers of constituents, something on the order of 60 to 100 constituents in the water, in the raw waters. That's a lot different than the 1,200 that Ms. Danforth talks about. And so if you look at the Danforth study and look at exactly how many constituents were found more than once out of the 175 wells, there were only about 400 that were found more than once out of those 175 wells. That means that those other 800 constituents were only found in 1 or 2 wells. And what we find from our analysis is that we sampled 46 wells in the Permian Basin. We found essentially 93 constituents that occurred all the time, and then plus or minus 15 constituents that occurred sporadically. So we're looking at not 1,200 constituents to deal with, we're looking at closer to 100. That is a big difference because the issues around safety and toxicity and being able to monitor for those number of constituents is very similar. And it gets to Chairman Thompson's point that municipal wastewater is a wastewater. It's like other wastewaters. It has a lot of constituents that have to be addressed. So I wanted to mention then I have in my presentation the kind of the constituents. There's been some discussion by NMED about the variability of produced water, and there is variability. But I wanted to mention that the variability across New Mexico is not as broad as the national variability. If you look at produced water in the Permian, 50% of the water is between 110 to 130,000 TDS. That's a pretty narrow band. When I say narrow, from an operational perspective of an innovative technology like thermal desalination that we're looking at, once you're in that range, that operation can be pretty consistent. So same thing in the San Juan Basin. We're looking at a narrow band of operational requirements, mostly between 20 and 30,000 TDS. It's easy to operate an RO system for that range of constituents without a lot of difficulty. So I think that what we're seeing from the data that we have, which is significantly more than the data that the Danforth study, they only looked at five wells in the Permian Basin and none in the San Juan Basin in that study. Our data is showing it's consistent with the results generally in the Danforth study, that there's closer to 100 or so constituents that are in all wells and then a few that you need to look at. So I think the Danforth study is valuable, but I think it's somewhat misleading that we're having to look at 1,200 constituents. We're not. We're looking at more on the order of 100. And I did put in my paper that some of the constituents that we were looking for, we did try to study in the raw produced waters, what we call tentative identified compounds, or what we would call, or some people call, unknowns. As Ms. Murphy mentioned, we've worked with the US EPA and NMED to develop a sampling protocol. We call it the NPDS Plus. NPDS is generally the constituents that you have to meet if you want to do a water discharge. There's about 90 of those. We look for about 400 constituents as we sample our produced water. So we're trying to pick up a lot more than just the NPDS requirements. We're going well beyond that. And then Ms. Murphy also mentioned about the consortium's activities associated with non-target analysis. And what we wanted to highlight here is that there are constituents in produced water that we don't know. The values that we show are pretty low. When I'm talking about in micrograms per liter, 0.500, which is essentially 0.5 milligrams per liter. That's a very, very small number in the raw waters. So when we treat that, we want to look for those also. So we acknowledge that there are some unknowns, but we have spent a year and a half with the US EPA and industry trying to develop approaches that allow us to do that. And what we have done is we've worked with the U.S. Department, the New Mexico Department of Ag, using their food safety laboratory to test treated produced water for these unknowns. And what we're finding, these are very sophisticated instruments. There's not a lot of them in the country. We do happen to have one at New Mexico State, which has allowed us to look at the treatment of these produced waters and then assess what kinds of unknowns are in there. We have generally found something on the order of 20 unknowns, but they're not unknowns anymore because we found them. So we have found 20 compounds that generally show up in a treated water that is from a non-target analysis. So the non-target analysis is an important thing to do. Generally and we have just published this paper in the Journal of Hazardous Materials. That is a very prestigious journal, and to be able to get that published is quite something. They took it because it's the first effort by anyone to really look for unknowns in treated produced water. What we found is unknowns were generally in picograms per liter, which is parts per quadrillion. We're talking about low levels. We have compared those constituents to a toxicity list of 800,000 constituents and found that none of those are toxic. So the work that we're doing, those are with thermal technologies in the Permian Basin. We have several technologies, as was mentioned by Mr. Herman and Ms. Fulham, that we have 7 or so additional technologies under testing right now. We have tested for reverse osmosis technologies in the San Juan Basin and have gotten the same kinds of results. We're testing in the Permian Basin now with several technologies. We just finished some analysis of a technology, a mechanical vapor recompression, which is a thermal technology.
Mr. Hightower.
Okay.
Ms. Fox?
Okay, go ahead.
You know, the last, I don't know, number of minutes of the testimony, of course, was not in his direct. It is arguably Sir rebuttal, although he hasn't specifically identified, as you requested, to identify what he is Sir rebutting. And there's no documentation of anything that he is saying in the record for us to have reviewed. And so I am going to ask you again to direct him to stick to his direct testimony that he provided, number one. And number two, if he is Sir rebutting, I think he has to demonstrate that it is proper Sir rebuttal.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Fox. So, Mr. Hightower, you've heard this objection before. And the way to put on the Sir rebuttal I think you'd like to put on is to identify the witness's testimony whom you are rebutting. And I think I heard a little bit of that when you were referring to the testimony of Ms. Murphy.
Okay. Well, I'm not rebutting Ms. Murphy. I think that she did everything she said was fine. I'm
Okay.
agreeing with her.
Okay.
Okay.
So,
So I can say, I think Dr. Hu mentioned the Danforth study of 1,200 constituents.
right. So
Dr. Miller talked about the Danforth study that was here right before me.
all right. So again, if you are rebutting, I just need you to identify the testimony you are rebutting. Yeah.
Sir rebutting.
Sir rebutting, and that may be a distinction that blurs here, Ms. Fox. All right. I understand. Thank you for your restraint. Mr. Hightower.
All right. So yes, I'll move on. I think that one of the presenters right before me talked about the need for treatment trains. I think that Dr. Hugh talked about the need for treatment trains. That is, I agree with both of those gentlemen that is the important thing. We have to have a treatment train to get the water to the quality that we are required. So in the consortium activities, we are utilizing treatment trains to get to the water qualities that I just mentioned. And I did talk about the fact that the tentatively identified compounds, I just mentioned it's in my presentation, but I'm talking about exactly what we're finding, which is not consistent with what others are finding. So I'll go to the next step in talking about demonstrations, and NMED mentioned, and the panel, NMED panel, that we were doing additional testing. I have in my presentation some examples of the testing that we're doing, both RO systems that we've tested, produced water from the Permian Basin and treated water from the San Juan Basin. I've got pictures of some of those treatment technologies. And the reason I put them in there is I wanted people to understand that we're not doing bench scale or laboratory scale. The scale that we're doing is field scale testing, which people, including the person that presented before me, said that we need those kinds of treatment studies. And I think that NMED mentioned in their studies that they need to have that capability to do additional large scale demonstration tests so that we can, at large scale, see what the operational efficiency of these technologies are. So I want to agree with NMED that having the ability to do demonstrations of treatment of produced water is important to move forward to make sure that we can collect enough data to verify that we can do this safely and fairly. The last thing that I want to mention that's in my presentation is that we have done a significant amount of work going around the state of New Mexico for the last 2 years, doing surveys of what people within the state of New Mexico think about the opportunities of using produced water to support fit for purpose uses. We've gone to state fairs, we've gone to county fairs, we've gone to water meetings. We've been around northwestern New Mexico, southeastern New Mexico, Las Cruces, state fairs in Albuquerque. And I have in my presentation kind of a summary of the study that we've done. We're in the process of publishing that study now, but it was done in conjunction with NMED to make sure that it was an appropriate study, that it had all that was not leading people down to get them to answer the questionnaire. It was about a 5 or 7 minute questionnaire so that they could fill it out. So they pulled them aside and they could fill it out quickly. We got over almost 700 responses to this webinar, excuse me, this survey. And I have it in my presentation. Generally the concepts that people have around the state of what they think the risks are of produced water and how they think that may help them. And if you look at that in my presentation, we're seeing 60% of the people that are willing to use treated produced water if it can be treated safely for uses inside the oil field. But at the same time, we're seeing groups that are looking at uses outside the oil field, like agriculture. 65% of those people were in approval of that. Of the people we talked to, those that said no, we would never want to use produced water, 5%. So I think what we're trying to say is, from our perspective, the work that we're supposed to be doing to support the Produced Water Act which is to try and identify fit for purpose treatment and reuse, and to do that safely, that we're well on our way to showing that we can do that, that the public is interested in the water. They see the risks associated with not having access to fresh water. And that we're seeing from our work, and all this work is published in peer-reviewed journals, that we're seeing that we can do this safely and cost effectively. Our intent is continue to work with the New Mexico Environment Department. We have another 6 or 7 technologies that we're evaluating. We're hoping that with those evaluations of those technologies, we get in the next 6 months to 9 months, that we'll have a preponderance of data to show that for a number of technologies or number of applications, that we can meet standards that are generally in line with what we think would be final standards. We don't have any final standards yet, but using 20.6.4.900 is our effort to try and get an understanding. Can we get close to treating the water to what we think the standards may be down the road? So with that, I'll finish and I'll take any questions, I guess. Probably looks like I'm going to get quite a few questions. So.
We'll see. Thank you, Mr. Hightower. Commissioners, I'll start on this side again. Commissioner Vihil, do you have questions at this time of Mr. Hightower?
I do not have questions.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Patton?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Hightower. I have, I think, one question. You mentioned, and I don't know if this is a part of the testimony, so whether I can ask about it or not, but you mentioned a recent publication in the Journal of Hazardous Materials. Can I ask for that citation, and can he provide that?
I can get it for you. I can probably get it for you in a couple of minutes. Yeah.
Okay.
It is NMED Exhibit 140.
Thank you very much,
I
Ms.
don't
Sanasi.
know, is that?
You said 140?
Yes, it's base number 3928.
Is that it? All right.
Yeah, let me ask one more question. So at the end of your presentation, you mentioned the public survey.
Yes.
And you mentioned that was being published somewhere, submitted for publication. Where are you planning on submitting that, or what stage of peer review is that in?
So it's in final stages of peer review at New Mexico State.
And then it will be submitted for
Then it
publication?
will be submitted. Then it will be submitted for a journal article for public view. And we can work with NMED if I've made some of the summary data available, and if NMED would be willing to do it, we can make other parts of that available for you to look at in advance. It's up to, but I'm willing to provide that to you as is if you'd like it.
Thank you, Chair Thompson.
I'm sorry, let me restart. Thank you. Have you got an explanation for why the consortium found several hundred constituents, whereas Danforth cites 1,200 constituents?
Sure. If you look, you read the Danforth paper, in the back, not in the abstract, but if you go through, she mentions, or they mention, that of those 1,200, only 400 of them were found more than once out of 175 wells. So if you take the 800 that they only found once at 175 wells, that suggests that each well has about 5 unknown constituents in it, not 800. And so if I look at other data from the EPA that has 250 wells that they use, they see that they find about 2,000 or 2,200. And if you do the same analysis and look at how many times that they show up more than once, it works out to be very close. So there is a consistency that the produced water has, and in the Danforth study, she talks about the EPA study that was done that's found at about 130 constituents per well. So the numbers that we're getting out of the Permian Basin and the San Juan Basin are very much in line with what Danforth saw and what the EPA saw. We're just presenting it a different way, which I think is more correct, which is what should we be looking at in each well, not what we're looking at across North America. Does that answer your question, Chairman Thompson?
Could you, I was a little bit confused about what you said EPA. They sampled 250 wells.
I think they have their own database, EPA does, that they use. And I don't have that reference. Not sure that EPA has referenced all that data. That came from a personal discussion with the person at EPA named Sean Timmons. I can get that information for you. He suggested that they had in their database 2,700 constituents over the whole United States, which is, and I don't know how many wells that is. So, but it's a large number of wells. Oh, Sean Timmons, SEAN THIMMONS. We have his contact information for you. He's on one of our working groups, our risk and toxicology working group.
This might be a good time to remind the commissioners that they're not allowed to do their own research outside of the record. But
I'm sorry.
No, it's fine.
I mean, Chairman Thompson, did you see where how those numbers begin to play out? Okay.
Thank you. So of those constituents that the consortium identified, are there any that would not be removed? Let's say at least 95% removed. Let's say at least 90% removal by the technologies that the consortium has explored, has evaluated.
So even if that's not my testimony, the exact number, can I give an answer?
Well, you do have testimony on the results of
the numbers we're getting from the technologies at a high level would be somewhere between a factor of 200 to 500 reduction in constituent levels. Which is well 99%. Yes.
For all the constituents that have been identified by the consortium.
Let me look at it real quickly. Generally that's the case. Yes.
That's fine.
There are a couple. Ammonia is one. Okay. We can only, it looks like if we don't do a treatment train, we can remove about 90% of the ammonia. If we do a treatment train, we can remove 99% of the ammonia. Ammonia is a difficult one. You know that. It's also difficult in municipal wastewater. But as far as the VOCs and as far as the inorganics, 99%, yes.
I have no further questions.
Okay, thank you. Vice Chair Armstrong.
Hightower. Mr. Hightower, in your testimony, you note at the top of page 3 that the Office of State Engineer expects a freshwater shortfall of as much as 750,000 acre feet per year in New Mexico by 2025. Where do you get that number from?
That's from the new study from the State Engineer's Office. I have it in this presentation, but I don't know that I didn't cite that, but it's just came out. I forget what the answer.
Okay.
I'll have to get with the state engineer. Maybe Ms. Zemlick might know that state engineer's report, what the title of that is. It's the one on the 750,000 acre feet shortfall by 20 in 50 years.
Sorry, the 50-year water plan?
Yeah, the one that
The
just came out.
Interstate Stream Commission report?
Right.
Okay. The next sentence says that's a 25% reduction in our fresh water supply. A 25% reduction from when?
If you look at, I think the data that we have, that I have for the state is our water supply, total water supply is about 2.5 million acre feet a year. So at 75% is somewhere in that range.
I understand, but what I don't understand is you're saying there was a 25% reduction, and I'm asking a reduction from what?
From the current water
amount.
use.
We're in 2024. It says by 2025 we're going to drop 25% in 1 year. I'm just trying to.
Oh, maybe that's a typo. Let me, in page 3, where did I say that?
The very first paragraph.
Okay.
First 2 sentences, 3 sentences.
On page 3
of
the supporting technical,
your oral
data?
testimony under the notice of intent.
Supported. Well, I was reading from my exhibit. Okay, so I don't have my oral testimony there. Okay, what can you tell me what it says? Maybe
Sure, it says the Office of the State Engineer expects a freshwater shortfall of as much as 750,000 acre feet per year in New Mexico by 2025. That is a 25% reduction in our freshwater supply.
Yeah,
And then
I
it
didn't.
continues
That's a typo.
Oh, okay.
It's in 50 years.
Okay, so it should say 2075.
2075.
That's a significant difference.
That
correct?
is a significant difference.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. That's my only question.
Okay. Sorry about that. I didn't catch that. I guess
Commissioner
2s look like
McWilliams?
7s to me. I get older. Sorry.
Commissioner McWilliams, do you have questions?
Yes, you mentioned the Danforth study was a study of 5 wells of produced water. Is that correct?
No, ma'am. I said 5 wells out of they included 5 wells out of the Permian
5
Basin.
wells of the Permian Basin.
And it's 175 wells across North America, which some from Canada. Much of that was from the Marcellus, and some data from other states, including 5 wells out of the Permian, and that's directly from Lowell,
And the
and
produced,
some in Mexico.
thank you. The Produced Water Consortium sampled 46 wells out of the Permian Basin.
Yes, we did, and there's a paper on that.
What is the composition of those wells? Are they new horizontal wells? Are they conventional wells? Is there a mix? Could you
Mostly
elaborate?
horizontal wells,
Mostly horizontal wells. Okay.
because that's generally, as was mentioned by NMED, that's where most of the excess water is coming from now. The conventional wells have essentially do enhanced oil recovery, where they inject them. The excess water is generally from conventional wells, and so we focused on conventional wells because that's the excess produced water that would be available for reuse in general.
Okay.
In general.
Okay. Fair enough. Good. Is the Produced Water Consortium concerned with the fracture fluids used to, I guess, unlock the oil and gas from these reservoirs?
So what we've tried to do, working with the oil and gas companies, is to have them try to go to what we call blue fracking, which is to reduce their use of any hazardous chemicals in their fracking. There are other surfactants other than PFOS and PFOA that they could use in their systems. The American Chemical Society has suggested that there are ways to go to what they call green fracking, which is chemicals that are greener. But we've talked with them about moving toward going to chemicals that are 100% non-hazardous.
Okay.
And I think that I presented to the Produced Water Society and to NMOGA on this, and we're getting some traction now as we move forward. I think that they understand, the industry understands that this is a big issue that needs to be addressed. And if they would take this on, this whole issue of proprietary chemicals needs to be addressed by industry. And I think we can do that together with them. We're suggesting that it would help us out. But currently, if they have a fracking fluid in there, we pick it up and we analyze it and we see what the level's at and whether it's toxic or not. But I think down the road, the industry needs to go ahead and take that on and try to eliminate some of those types of fracking fluids. That would help them out, I think, and would help out the public perception of the produced water and potentially reduce some of the costs of trying to treat it and reuse it.
So does the consortium have a good handle on what type of chemicals are being used in that fracturing process?
I wouldn't say that anybody has a good handle on those exactly.
Okay.
We have looked into it. We'll tell you that some of the companies that talk about proprietary chemicals, their proprietary chemical is something that's household. They just don't want to know want people to know what it is. And I think we need to be a lot more transparent about that.
So are you saying that they're not hazardous chemicals?
Just because they're proprietary doesn't mean they're hazardous. Okay, that's the point. And
Understood.
we have found that there are some proprietary chemicals that are proprietary but are not hazardous.
Okay, so the
Just listening in on
proprietary.
hearings. Oh my goodness.
The proprietary nature of the chemicals are, in your opinion, what is their purpose of being proprietary?
The purpose generally is that they have a special process or a special combination of chemicals that they want to use that maybe no one else is using, that provides them with a better performance in the frac. That's what I'm seeing from industry is those are things that people would like to classify as proprietary. So it may not be a constituent that's harmful. It may be how the two constituents work together or three constituents work together to come up with a better frac.
I see.
That's all.
Okay. I wrote down one of your quotes was that you guys had published in peer-reviewed journals.
Yes.
Could you elaborate on what journals those are?
We have about 30 articles. I can provide that to you. They're in journals like Journal of Hazardous Materials, Water's a big journal for water research. There are a number of technical journals out there and we're working with NMED. They've asked us to make sure that our work is all peer reviewed and published for the public to see. So we have lists of all those papers. There's a whole lot of them that we can provide to you.
Okay.
And all of those are on our website. Go and look at those that we have published over the last 5 years.
Okay. What is your opinion on the proposed rules? Is the Produced Water Consortium supportive of the environmental department's proposed rules?
I think I put in my paper that what we would support is their proposed initial rule that they proposed. We're in 100% in agreement
The
on
current version?
the
No,
initial version, not the revised version.
the one that was submitted December 27th of
That's correct.
2023.
We agree. I actually have complimented the New Mexico Environment Department on that version. We in the consortium, and at least from the management side, thought that it was a very well written, very well identified, and was supportive of the activities as we see with the Water Reuse Action Plan and with the work that we have to do in support of the Produced Water Act.
So the changes that came in the third version and submitted in March. What is your opinion of those changes?
We thought that it limited things a lot. We're in agreement with everybody here that I've heard today and yesterday and the day before, and with the New Mexico Environment Department, that produced water is a toxic material. It's hazardous, and untreated raw produced water should not be put into any uses, that it has to be treated to be reused. And so I think in the original version, that's what the regulation said, that they eliminated or prohibited.
Every day is a
We thought that the
potential.
prohibitive rule would be that
Farming.
raw produced water would not be used. And we agree with that. We did not understand that they were thinking about a prohibitive rule that said that treated produced water and untreated produced water would be not allowed.
I see. No further questions.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Dominguez.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. Mr. Hightower, thank you for your testimony today. Let me start out with should be a fairly easy question. This for my own edification. You're here testifying on your own behalf and not on behalf of the consortium. Is that correct?
Well, the way that I was going to present was all the experience that I had on desal and desal research and technology demonstration. And that was my plan. And then because I'm also with the consortium, I was going to present on some of the data of the consortium along with all my other data but it looks like somehow that got diverted. But I am not here representing the whole consortium. No.
Okay.
This is a summary of what I know that the consortium's done and what I've done and others have done in this area.
Okay. Thank you very much.
And I'm not
got a little bit gray there in some spots, so just so that we have it on the record. A few of these are follow-up questions from previous commissioners. So let's talk about your study in the Permian Basin. You talked about finding constituents at less than 100 or a little over 100. I don't know the exact numbers you use, but kind of a range in there. Were those known constituents or a combination of known and unknown?
So what we found was the discussion that I presented, and let's see if it's in, and it is in my testimony. So if you go to page 13 and page 12, the data on those two pages, 12 and 13, you see some tables like this.
That's in your exhibit.
It's in my, what do I call it? My exhibit 1.
Exhibit 1. Okay. I'm with you.
So Ms. Murphy mentioned that the consortium in conjunction with NMED came up with an NPDES plus list. And so the information on table 12 is all from the NPDES plus list. All right. So those are things that of the 400 constituents we look at, here's a summary of some of those constituents. I show on page 13 that when we look at the 400 constituents, we did see some TICs, tentatively identified compound, which means that there were some compounds that we identified that we weren't specifically looking for when you do a mass balance. So we see that there are some unknowns in there that we did that are beyond that 400. And that is the unknown analysis that I mentioned that we have done to look at those, and we found an additional 20 compounds that we would have missed if we only did the 400. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
And to mention why that's important is as we do our treatment train, we have to make sure that we remove those whatever 400 we find, plus those unknowns to make sure that we're treating that safely. So.
Okay, and that leads me right into my next question, which was talking about those unknowns. And you've heard some of the previous witnesses talk about various levels of unknowns. So as a researcher, how will the criteria and methodology of to be able to test for those unknowns, how will those be developed?
So those processes have already developed. We've developed the process with New Mexico State to use high resolution LCMS systems that we have at the New Mexico Department of Agriculture, to use that system to quantify and qualify what those unknowns really are, and to look at those very small ticks that we call them, tentatively identified compounds, and identify what they are and what their concentrations are, and are they toxic or not. And that is a very difficult problem, because you can imagine if you're looking at parts per quadrillion, that you have to have a very sophisticated instrument. You can't, it has to be almost in a laboratory that you can really control. You got to really control your samples. It takes a while to get those answers. You've got to be very careful in how you go through and evaluate that. That takes essentially months of time. So we have to get better at accelerating how quickly we can do that. But that's why some of the data results that we have get delayed a little bit, because you're talking about months and months worth of effort to really identify those unknown compounds, quantify them, figure out what they are, and develop treatment technologies to make sure that you can remove those. Because a lot of those are at such low levels, you've got to go in and look at post-treatment or polishing steps to remove those things and get those out. So it takes a while. So it's a difficult process.
Yes.
I think that's one of the reasons that a lot of people don't do it. I will tell you that, as an example, Texas Tech has a system exactly like ours at New Mexico State. They don't want produced water anywhere near that instrument because of the problem of contaminating that instrument for what they need it for. So we've had to work very closely with the ag department at New Mexico State to be able to use that and make sure that we don't damage that with produced water, because it's not a cheap instrument to maintain or operate. Okay.
Yeah. And as you find any of those new contaminants and work through that process, those testing methodologies, are those then being EPA approved or AOAC approved, or some that next level of testing criteria that has to be done so that an agency such as Environment Department can rely on that methodology to set a standard?
We have a whole risk and toxicology working group that's working to develop that information. So there's about 30 people in that group. It includes NMED, USCPA, both their ORD, their Office of Research and Development. And as we develop some standards, those can become possibly standards for other states to use in looking at these unknowns.
Thank you for that. Last question here, hopefully. Did I hear you correct that you're more of a proponent on a case-by-case basis of well testing or approving for produced water rather than a statewide basis?
I think that's something that the state ought to look at. For example, San Juan Basin, I think it's much easier to treat than the Permian Basin water. And maybe it would have a lot of additional distributed applications where you would have smaller plants and provide support to local communities. In the Permian Basin, you have some cities like Jal that are really close to being out of water, and maybe that's a place where the risks of not having water versus the risks of using treated produced water is something that they might want to take on more easily or more quickly. So I would say that your idea of maybe a series of options for states or cities is probably the right way to go, rather than one state standard. That was your question, I think, is what you were getting to. And
yeah.
I think I can, from my explanation, you can see that there's different qualities of water, different locations, and different risks by different communities that they may be interested in using that water quicker than Albuquerque or Santa Fe.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to renege on my earlier statement.
Because
question.
This is the last question.
So in the studies that you've done, and you've talked about the number of constituents that you found, of those known and unknown constituents, is there currently groundwater or surface water standard for all those constituents?
I don't think so. I don't think that some of those unknown constituents we have any standards for, because I don't think people knew that they were in the water. But in what we're trying to do with our post-treatment and polishing is to remove all of those to a point where there is no toxicity. That may be the way we have to go, is just to make sure that there's nothing in the water that's toxic. So does that make
okay
sense? And what we're seeing is that we can remove, so far we've been able to remove all of those.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hightower. That's all the questions I have.
Thank you, Commissioner Fry.
So that was a good segue to my first question. You were talking about the Raton water being very high quality water. Yes. What standards were you comparing that to?
Okay.
And I mean, generally.
In general, the Raton water consistently comes in at 1,500 parts per million TDS. So, and Raton water is kind of a coal bed methane water, which means that it's natural gas rather than oil. So it has a lot less organics than you would see in a Permian Basin water with a lot of oil residue. So it's generally a very high quality water. Low VOCs, low TDS, low
and
metals.
You're talking ppm
parts per million levels, yes. So that's why in the universe of produced water, that's a pretty high quality raw produced water. Would not
that helps, because the drinking water standard is just 500. So
right, I never said
just wanted to clarify that you're not talking about those standards.
No, we're talking about relative standards. So standards that we see for agriculture are more on the order of 1,000 to 2,000 parts per million TDS. A class 1 agricultural water, by the old definitions, is less than 700. A class 2 is 2,000 TDS or less. So that would definitely be within a class 2 irrigation quality generally. Doesn't mean that you're not going to have to do some polishing or some pretreatment to use it, but it's in that quality of water. It's not necessarily a drinking water quality. I don't think I ever said
Right.
that. It's but
No,
relative
you didn't, but I just
relative to 100,000 parts per million TDS, it's a fairly clean water.
since I work in the drinking water world, it's
Okay.
important to make
I
to distinguish.
I don't
So
try not to use drinking water because people.
Try not to step on the end of each other's sentences, please.
Okay.
Sorry. I think we're in chat mode, aren't we?
Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay. So let's see here. What's my train of thought? Oh yeah. So you were saying that you couldn't the range of quality that we see in produced water across the state is not the same range we see in the country. Could you describe what that range is across the country?
You know, I've read a couple of EPA reports on the range across the country, but I don't think, I mean, I have it in this presentation, but I don't have it in here. So maybe I shouldn't address
No,
that.
that's all right. Okay. And then the last.
But I can tell you that we're generally in the middle of we're not the highest. We're not the lowest. The highest that I've seen, for example, on TDS is 400,000. That's and I wouldn't want to treat that. And the lowest I've seen is 1 part per million TDS. I don't know where that produced water comes from. That'd be nice. But I think the middle ranges, and I have an EPA report that actually looked at water across the state and did the 25 across the states, did the 25 percentile, 50, 75, and the extremes, max and min. And I can get that to you, but I can show you where we sit in that. Okay.
Okay, great. So my last questions are about the survey.
Okay.
I was pretty interested by that. And in part because, our stakeholders are not just industry and state, but it's the people that are commenting today. And so I just did a non-scientific survey of the commenters we've had. And, it seems like 50-50 today, the people that talked today that were in support. Your survey showed a higher percent that would be in favor of using produced water. And knowing that surveys, we have to work hard to make them scientific, and it's not published yet. Can you talk about how you addressed approaching the questions and your demographics and the people that you're asking questions of?
All these number of meetings. Caitlin's been doing actually a lot of shit.
Okay. All right. So a couple of things. We thought the survey was very important to do correctly. That's why we went through both NMSU's human survey group to review it, and we worked with NMED to review that also. So I think the survey, by going that route, we had certain wordings that had to be set up. The series of questions had to be set up. So I think from a technical standpoint, we did the right thing as far as making sure the survey got the right kinds of answers. On a survey of this type going across the state, we have a group that worked this, our public education and outreach group, trying to figure out how the best way to do this was. Because if we focused only in Bernalillo County, we're not going to get the rural community. If we focus only in the rural community, we're not going to get others. So we tried to do as many places that we would see different demographics. County Fair gets a lot of different demographics, but it's generally around the state fair is generally around the 4 counties that are in Albuquerque. So we decided that we go out to state fairs or county fairs where you get local populations from the cities as well as a lot of agricultural or rural people. So we did fairs in Las Cruces, we did fairs in Artesia and Roswell, We tried to do our fairs in Hobbs. They wanted to charge us $1,500 to come and do a survey, and said no. We were going to go to the Deming and do the duck races. They wanted to charge us $1,000. So if they charged us, we didn't go. But I'm not sure that we would get anything different if we went to Hobbs. I mean, I have a feeling what we might get there. But we spent time in the Four Corners. We went to the water assembly in Albuquerque and got all the people involved with the water assembly and asked them to fill this out so we could get people in large urban areas. Not that Albuquerque is going to have access to produced water, but to see what they think about the concepts around risk, the need for additional water resources, etc. I think what we're finding from our study is that areas that are experiencing drought, like the southeast part of the state and even the southwest and the south central, are more apt to be interested in additional water supply access than maybe city of Albuquerque or some others. So there's a little bit of difference, but I think where you're seeing water stress and water drought, the idea of, additional water paid for by industry is something that resonates with people. And I think that we'll have that in the study. And if you would like to look at that, our preliminary data, we'd be more than happy to you. So I think I mentioned this concept around risk of water, non-availability of water is a big driver for a lot of people. Okay.
So I heard you talk about the southeast part of the state and central. What about the other basins, Raton and San Juan?
So Raton is not a big basin and there's not a lot of activity
Right.
in it. So we haven't really been to Raton, but San Juan, we've been couple of times to San Juan Basin. And we have plans to go back to some of the Navajo and Indian tribal activities, some of the rodeos and things like that this year to get maybe some additional information. We have it by kind of where we went. We can show the different results and what we're seeing. Okay.
Okay. And where are you looking to publish this?
I don't know the journal. I'll have to talk to that working group.
All right. That's my last question. Thank you.
All right. Commissioner Zemlich, if you have lengthy questioning, we should take a break. Okay. Let's take a 10-minute break then.
I can make them quick.